Joining us now, Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks, a first-term Republican from Iowa. Congresswoman Miller-Meeks served for more than 2 decades in the U.S. Army before working as a doctor in Iowa. And thank you, Congresswoman, for being with us today. You've described the events of the past couple of weeks as a travesty, and you've called for President Biden, and along with the Pentagon leadership, to resign. I wonder what you think that would accomplish by putting essentially a President Kamala Harris in charge of what is about to happen next.
Well, I think you have to be able to trust your leadership and at the administration level, as what we've seen with this withdrawal in Afghanistan, that it's a debacle. We, in fact, did not end a war. We gave up a strategic base, a place of operation, and we have put our homeland at risk by not having surveillance capabilities in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, and we won't have eyes on Russia or Iran or China. So we have really created a problem for ourselves and set up for another 9/11 in the future.
We expect to hear from President Biden a little bit later from now in the 2 o'clock hour, Congresswoman. Is there anything that he could say when he addresses the American people that would give you confidence in the way forward?
He could say that we're going to stop stonewalling individuals trying to get American citizens out of Afghanistan, that we are going to get every one of our American citizens out of Afghanistan, that we are going to leave no one behind, and that we're going to retake Bagram Air Base so that we have the ability to have surveillance capabilities, which we do not now. That would give me some confidence that this president and Anthony Blinken and Sullivan understand the magnitude of what they have done.
Congresswoman, last year the Trump administration was negotiating with the Taliban. Then former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo took a photo op with Abdul Ghani Baradar. And then, of course, the former president also had invited the Taliban to the U.S., Camp David, of last year, which we know didn't end up happening, but there was an invite. Did you support that level of engagement with the Taliban last year?
I wasn't in office at the time that this was negotiated, but if you'll remember that President Trump had certain conditions in order to be able to interact with the Taliban, and those conditions were breached. So there was no need to go forward with a withdrawal when the conditions that were on the ground set to have interactions with the Taliban were breached. And we should not fund the Taliban. We should make sure no revenue stream goes to them. And we should get every single American citizen and their family members out of Afghanistan. We need to get our interpreters out of Afghanistan. This is our moral obligation as a country to do so. We are still at war. There is still a global war on terror. Whether or not the president and Anthony Blinken thinks we need to engage in that war, we are still at war.
But Congresswoman, if I could just understand from you a little bit more. There was obviously public engagement with the Taliban. Do you think that undermined the efforts of the withdrawal, especially since it did weaken the Afghan government?
I think what weakened the Afghan government was for us not to communicate, to give a date certain when we were going to withdraw, for us to pull out of a military air base in the middle of the night without notifying our allies, without notifying Great Britain, without notifying the Afghani government or the Afghani military. So I think there's, plenty of what has happened in the past month. We, for months, have asked what the administration's plan was to get both American citizens and Afghan interpreters out of Kabul, out of Afghanistan. We were never given a plan, so this has been a disaster in the making for months. I think the intelligence was there. They chose to ignore the intelligence. I think they got military advice that they also chose to ignore. And again, the Taliban had already breached any agreement that had been reached. I think most of us understand that you need to have some engagement, but the Taliban was not supposed to replace the Afghani government. They weren't supposed to try to take Kabul, and those things were breached. So whatever agreement was made with the former president, President Biden is now the president, has been the president for 7 months. This was their plan. This was the Secretary of State's plan. They were in charge of this withdrawal, and this is on their hands. Again, we cannot leave American citizens behind in Afghanistan. We need to get all of the American citizens and their family out, and we need to pressure this administration to revisit that.
You're not the only member of the House, Congresswoman, that has called for the U.S. military to retake Bagram Air Base. President Biden has said that would require committing thousands of troops in a potentially deadly battle to retake that airfield. As a 24-year veteran of the Army, I wonder if you believe that's true, and if so, is it worth it?
Well, I think when you look at what happened prior to the withdrawal, with 2,500 troops, we were able to maintain the Taliban off into the periphery of the country. They had somewhat stable functioning government, if you will, and we had surveillance capabilities and counterintelligence capabilities that we no longer have. So when you think of actions in the Middle East for over the horizon, you have to go to Qatar, which is 7 hours away. We don't have a base of operation any longer in that area. They have put our homeland at risk, and we have put us in the position where, as I said, jihadist terrorists are still at war with us, whether our country or our president wants to admit that or not. And we have put our homeland at risk. We are less safe now, and the Taliban has more area now than they had at 9/11.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time today up at the Capitol. Congresswoman Mariannette Miller-Meeks of Iowa. Let's get a recap, though.